Welcome back to our Lenten podcast, Faith That Will Not Fail, as we develop 10 practices that will help our faith in times of hardship. Today's practice and this week's practice is about worship and things that draw us to worship God. Today focuses on the nearness of God. And Michelle starts this kind of section biblically by looking at the story of Moses and how Moses knew that without God going before him, that they weren't going to succeed. Mm-hmm. And there's this kind of interchange with God and the people of Israel with a pillar of fire and a cloud of smoke that kind of guided them through their day and their night, fire at night, smoke in day. And that space, that the physical manifestation between that and the manna reminded them that God was near. What's an experience that you all have? Because that's pretty mystical, right? Like, what's an experience that you all have of God being near?
The question for me goes even back further in Moses' story, right? To the initial place where he encounters God with this burning bush, right? And for me, it's like, when do I know God's near? Or how do I know God's near, right? Because I think sometimes we can make it a very spiritual thing, right? Smoke and fire and all this stuff. And I think God moves in our lives in more simple ways, right? Like this morning, I got a verse texted to me, and it was a verse that had meaning for me when I was first in my call of the Assemblies of God. And I was like, oh, that's funny that this person would send me this verse today. And it was just this reminder. And the day before, it was a rainbow I saw. Whenever I see rainbows, I think back to, Noah and the Ark and things like that. I'm one of those. But I saw, this rainbow yesterday, and it was, for me, it's always this reminder. And I needed to be reminded, God is with me in these common and ordinary moments. And it's just when I choose to acknowledge He's next to me.
I think it's so important to name that it's the common and ordinary moments, because we're not all going to have a burning bush. We're not all going to see the cloud. We're not all going to see the fire.
And I have one in my office. I'm just kidding. I really don't. Just kidding.
And so it's like, there's been one moment in my life where I was driving away from a parking lot, and I had this kind of deep sense of, you need to go back and turn around your car. And I went back, and there was a man crying in the parking lot, and I was able to pray with him about an intense loss.
Wow.
Like that was, hearing and encountering the voice of God.
Yeah.
That's never happened again. And it hadn't happened before that. And it's not going to happen for most of our listeners either, in that specific way. And so it's, how do we encounter God and feel the presence in the ordinary and the near?
Yeah.
One of the small groups that I'm a part of, we went through this podcast about, a guy who was hiking in the woods, and as he's hiking in the woods, he hears all this rustling in his bushes, and this woman pops out, and she has huckleberries shoved in her face and all in her mouth, and she's like, man, the huckleberry's so good, and he's like, it was that moment where he realized that this entire journey of hiking, the huckleberries were all around him, and they were like the most luscious and amazing huckleberries you could find. Yeah. And I think that's where we miss it, right? Is that we think we're looking for a burning bush when in fact there's a bush full of huckleberries all around us.
All around us, yeah.
And God is fully present and near us all the time. But if we don't pause and take notice, if we're not watching, if we're not expecting, if we're not saying, God, I know you're here, show me, reveal yourself to me in a meaningful way, then we will miss it, right? And it takes these moments of, crazy people in bushes shoving their faces full of huckleberries to awaken us again that God is near. And that nearness not only is a reason to worship God, but often draws us to worship God in meaningful ways.
Absolutely.
Our practice for the nearness of God is to take 5 minutes, find a quiet spot, maybe even a spot with some sunshine shining through one of your windows. Read all the 24 verses of Psalm 139. Read them slowly, take in God's presence, then take a second, pass through David's words. Make his prayer of worship your own. Your Father stands as a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire, guiding you every step into your own promised land. The world is full of huckleberries, so find them.